Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and you're listening to the latest chapter of Tales from the Triverse, and this is Magic Part 2. Brulea Palinor, 3208, Bright Sun. Yana hadn't mentioned that attempting to complete Cainamor's spell would most likely kill her. It had destroyed Cainamor, after all, to the extent that his body was never found, and he had been considerably more skilled than her. The thought of bringing about her own death had played on her mind for months. She'd lived with it for so long that it was a part of her, a ghoul over her shoulder, stepping closer each day, a horror yet to happen, but which had approached inexorably with each turn of the sun. Years ago she had flirted with the fantasy of surpassing Cainamor, of correcting his mistakes and making a better go of it. Finding a more elegant solution, she would navigate the remnants of the spell, using intuition that had eluded the great wizard. As she sat in the small, dusty university office plucking at spell threads and feeling her way past the inactive portal's circumference, she knew that it had been the foolish imaginings of a younger girl. She was old enough, experienced enough, to know with certainty that she would not survive what had to be done. Opening the portal would be the final act of her life. Miroslava had a right to know, but would then whisk her away and take them far beyond the city and the concerns of the Triverse. Slava would hide them in the far corner of the world, to live out their days quietly. She could tell Lola, but she too would try to talk her out of it. Christian would not care, and was already angered by his inability to convince her to close the portals. So many choices, made by so many people, decisions, compounded upon decisions, catalysed by the years into this singular moment. An avalanche of actions, and she, the pebble, pushed along by the torrent. If she was to die, then this was the way to do it. Making that final decision, matching the achievement of Palinor's greatest wielder, and changing the Triverse for the betterment of all. She was nearly ready, having mapped the tendrils of energy leaking from the portal, the strands that dipped invisibly into the ground, a web snaking to the core of the planet. In the other direction, a glimmer of what lay beyond the void. On the other side of the portal. Her calculations indicated it would be Max Earth, but there was still space in which to be surprised. It would make sense, though. There was a corresponding inactive portal in Max Earth London at the same relative coordinates. Connecting them, establishing direct contact between Max Earth and Palinor for the first time, would break the stranglehold of Mid-Earth and the Joint Council. Yana might not live to see the consequences, but there would, at least, be a change. The responsibility was a heavy weight, and if she lost focus for even a moment, she would be crushed. Slava leaned against the doorframe, smiling with concern, a vision as always. For a fleeting moment Yana thought that perhaps they should run away together and never be seen again. "How are we looking?" Slava asked. Yana could feel her wife's thoughts reaching out across the room, not intrusively, but as a telepathic hug, manipulated through Slava's micrology. It wasn't actual telepathy, but instead a direct manipulation of brain neurons. It was a gentle hand brushing affectionately through hair. Micrologists, so often thought of as assassins and spies, were also capable of such subtle beauty. "I'm nearly ready," Yana replied. "I will need you here when I begin. It will be a great strain and you can help stabilize me." "Of course," Slava said, sitting next to her on the ground and taking her hand. "I'm always by your side. And what of the enemy?" Once she would have asked, which one? There had been so many. As with her own reality, all of those foes had been reduced to the singular threat of the megaship. She could feel it probing, tugging at Cainamor's incomplete spell, trying to understand it. When she had the opportunity, she nudged the ship away, diverted its attention to a different energy strand. The ship lacked finesse, preferring instead to bludgeon its way to a solution, and its intent wasn't to complete the spell, but to expand it exponentially. "It's only a matter of who reaches the tipping point first," she said. "I can only counter it for so long without being detected. The others are trying to come up with a plan. Eric, the six-blade wielder, thinks he has an idea. A refraction spell?" "Oh," said Yana, "that could work. It would have to be on a massive scale, but the ship is sucking energy from the sun, so refracting the light away from it could slow it down at least. He says they'll be ready to go when you are." A small part of the ceiling fell, a tumbling ball of plaster and stone, no bigger than a human hand, crumbling as it hit the floor. Few buildings remained intact on campus after the day's many assaults. Looking up, Jonas saw the hole where the ceiling had collapsed. Beyond the hole all was dark, which struck her as odd given the late afternoon sun. Even diminished, even with the megaship draining its energies, there was still daylight coming in through the shattered windows. "Slava," she said, clutching at the woman's sleeve. "Get Eric. I need to speak with him." The darkness was not caused by an absence of light. It was a portal tear, newly formed. They'd run out of time. It would take a coordinated effort, led by Eric and the scholars, with all surviving wielders in Brulia contributing as best they could. Physiologists and elementalists would be critical, with micrologists and visualists providing support. Eric had the maths worked out, but it was very much back of a napkin rather than carefully thought through. Field testing, the theory was risky, but there were no other options. As Jana had noted, it was now or never. He'd said his goodbyes, such as they were. Nothing too sappy. The others wouldn't want to be embarrassed. Well, other than Ellenbryn, but she always was a softie. The best approach was simply to get on with it. The megaship, as everyone seemed to be calling it, despite sounding ridiculous, was brutal and individually powerful beyond anything Eric had encountered, but it was an oaf, a fast-thinking, infinitely sophisticated Max Earth machine that knew absolutely nothing of this world, of the true nature of wielding, or much of anything else. It had knowledge, but not wisdom. It had facts, but did not understand them. That would be their edge, and its undoing. Eric's own skills were hyper-localized about his person, which made them uniquely unsuitable for the task at hand. Powerful physiologist though he was, there was no circumstance in which he'd be able to get close enough to make a difference. Instead, he would guide the hands of others. Concentrating, pulling energy from the waning sun, he altered his mass, floating into the air, above the shattered university campus, followed by the academics. They were all terrified, unused to needing to apply their magic beyond their protective cloisters, but their skill would overcome their fear. As he ascended, Eric had to adjust his trajectory to avoid the tiny portal tears that were opening all over the city, each of them small but increasingly numerous. There was no telling what was on the other side of them, or how large they would grow in number or size. The megaship had presumably decided that it knew enough, and it was attempting to replicate the Canemor's spell on a massively enlarged scale. It would tear asunder the planet upon which they stood. Eric wondered how far-reaching its spell was cast. Was it only affecting Palinor, or were the tears rippling out across the Triverse? Were the spell's effects felt beyond Palinor, to the other planets, or to the stars beyond? It mattered not. Their job was to stop it. Word had been sent out, across the city, to any mages still standing. He could see them now, in the distance, some standing on rooftops, others rising up as he was, some on the backs of Koth or racing to the top of intact towers. Hovering above the city was the megaship, having returned from its brief sojourn into space. There had been a slender hope when it seemed possible that the ship would not return. The sight of its oblong, silhouetted shape descending back towards the city had sent a collective shiver through all of them gathered at the university. Eric raced above the rooftops, towards the centre of the city, almost directly below the megaship. The mages had assembled in a loose ring surrounding it. Sunlight was its primary source of energy, and it was siphoning that fuel at a dangerous rate. A human mage would have been burned to a crisp by the same power draw. It also meant that the ship was inefficient, requiring absurd amounts of energy for even the most basic spell, let alone the multiversal expansion it was now attempting. They would starve it of fuel, and, like a fire, it would be extinguished. At his signal, the mages all began casting, in a wave rippling out across the city, elemental spells superheating the air around the ship, and physiological manipulations of the air density. They were building a warping shield, one that would bend the light from the sun, redirect it along a new path, away from the megaship. An invisible dome, acting like the glass of an aquarium, but tighter, more focused. A series of manipulating prisms one upon another, creating a zone of darkness around the ship. It was not perfect. Reflected light was still bouncing up from the ground below, but it was enough to rob the hungry ship of its main food. The portal tears that had been filling the air like odd butterflies began to close, and Eric sensed an abrupt diminishing of the ship's magic activity. The megaship itself faltered, somehow looking like a person tripping over an out-of-place cobblestone. It shifted awkwardly where it hovered, then dropped perhaps 100 metres towards the ground before catching itself. It wasn't wielding magic solely for spells, he realised. Magic was also its central power source, which would explain how it was still functioning at all while on Palinor. Those inefficiencies left it vulnerable. It could not remain operational without an exceptional rate of energy flow. The plan was working to slow down its attempts to rip open new portals, and Eric began to wonder if it could bring down the ship altogether. Thanks for listening. You can leave a comment, subscribe, like the thing, over at simonkjones.substack.com.